you know, it's designed obviously to raise awareness, and we've found that the symbol has actually been very powerful. It's really resonated. We've had some very moving responses. I've got an email back from someone who said, you know, thank you for the knot. This year I'll keep it inside my handbag. Hopefully next year I'll be able to wear it on the outside. I went to a service on Saturday at South Sydney Uniting Church. We've asked all communities to come together and just hold events just to raise awareness, and you know, incredibly moving. Believe me, I'm not, you know, religious in any way. In fact, some of my abuse was, you know, involved with religious systems, but just having a sense of community there, I just know how powerful it was, not just for me, but for other people who have been impacted, and very important for other community members who've never actually thought about the legacy of abuse to be there and to understand. So, thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. Got some questions for Cathy? Comments?
Hi, my name's Shelley. I'm interested in the relationship between the processes that we have now suiting the state, and if we bring in trauma-informed care, is this like possible that these medical systems would want to change? Like a lot of the things that happen due to trauma are what they do in the military to change people so that they become great soldiers or useful. Is there any reason why the system would like to stay as it is?
So how to establish the argument, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think if you can establish the argument about the cost savings,
I think
which
that's
is
the only way to
which
go,
is
isn't it?
which is the only way to talk to politicians.
Exactly.
That, you know, you will decrease hospitalisations, suicide attempts, crisis, you know, imprisonments, etc., etc., and the social repercussions as well. You know, people who can't sustain a job, the relationship issues. So that's the argument that I think. But it is very hard because governments like short-term wins, and obviously this is not going to be a short-term process. It's like, you know, when you see reports on closing the gap, and you're not going to change entrenched intergenerational disadvantage and cultural dislocation in 6 months and expect that you know you're going to have magically everything's going to be better.
No, it's just going to be a long process.
It's a very long process, but governments need to understand that it's worth the investment in the change.
And it's also a good thing to go to the churches and to educate them.
Yeah.
Because then it flows out into the community more and more.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously, you know, the churches have their own terrible history, and particularly about their lack of response. But you know, to get them engaged, we're not just talking about abuse within the churches. You know, for some people, the church is a very important community for them. So it's about all communities and what resonates with one person. You know, their community. You know, we had a community in Tennant Creek where a group of Indigenous elders went with people from a women's refuge out to a sacred site and put an enormous ribbon on the rock, and they had a smoking ceremony, you know. So, and I mean that was amazing, and people just told their stories.
About do you press the button?
It should be on. It's got a green light in it.
About 15 years ago, I told my psychiatrist about 2 separate incidences where my sadistic brother had traumatized me, and I asked him whether it would have affected my mental health, and he emphatically said no. What motivated professionals at that time to say things like that?
Lack of education, complete lack of education. That, you know, certainly from my training, you believe in sort of a totally biological or genetic model, so you don't look at the cause of something, you know. So, I mean, I have friends who are obviously medicos, and for them depression is all about an imbalance in, you know, serotonin. And I know that some of these people have reasons in their lives to be depressed. So it's about training and education and understanding. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on in your talk that you had a 10-year period where you couldn't remember anything.
Yep.
Has that changed, and if so, how did that come about?
Through, I mean, I still have great gaps in my memory, but I had a lot of flashbacks, and so I used to dissociate a lot,
yeah.
And through the dissociation I would regress to different ages, and different fragments of memory would come back.
Right.
So, and I also did my own ransacking of my mother's house, not quite ransacking, but I looked for, you know, whatever information I could find, and it was about piecing bits of it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that some of that story, you know, it's not going to be 100% accurate,
Yeah.
but I know that the essence of it is, because I know the impacts on me, and I know how I've changed as a result.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about understanding all of that, and acknowledging there'll be a lot I can't remember. It was interesting, I went to a school reunion back in Brisbane recently, and I left Brisbane when I was 14, and that was really actually fascinating, being back in that space, and seeing what I could remember, and seeing what people could reflect back to me. So, yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Did the psychologist help you in that process?
In the memory, no, not at all. No, there was no technique for her to encourage me to do that. My flashback started, in fact, before I went to her.
Right.
The first flashbacks I recovered with my husband, who at that time I suppose was the person I trusted most. And, you know, we both thought I was absolutely bonkers, which I probably know. But there was never any process to make those memories come back. They just, and as I developed that trust with my psychologist, then, you know, I would dissociate in her room, and that's when a lot of it would come back. Yeah.
Tell me, just another one. Was it with these flashbacks that happened? Was it around 40 years old that happened?
Yeah, I was in my mid-40s.
Yeah.
Who runs our workshops, and who worked for 25 years running groups for male survivors, and he says that gambling is, you know, just came up all the time.
And the problem gambling is a different level to gambling.
Yeah, problem gambling.
Quite a few years ago, I read that each suicide costs the economy so many millions of dollars, and I read this actually after my children's father had committed suicide. Made me pretty angry at the time that they looked at it in dollars, but it's really tapping into what you're talking about, that they look for a cost-effective thing. And I thought, well, there's so much counselling, and like I think physical help, like a lot of times I've had really bad depression for 12 years now since my children's father committed suicide. And like I've needed like physical help at times, someone to come and mow my lawn or fix my house roof or something. And there aren't any services for someone in their 40s or 50s who looks otherwise well. If I had like if I was in a wheelchair or something, there'd be a service that might bring me some food or mow my lawn. But physical help in those day-to-day things when you're really depressed.
Absolutely.
And like you think of it, I think it was $6 million, like going back 12 years ago, they said a suicide costs the community in people's lost days off work and people's counselling that they need. So, like, I can't see that you couldn't save anyone's life for $6 million by helping them get the things in their life that are problematic, getting them going again, like you say, a recovery model that gives people a chance to get themselves back on their feet again. Because once your life starts to slide away, it's really hard if you can't keep down a job or you can't get a job. And we could do so many things to help people, because suicide is now the #1 cause of death in Australia in people under 45, or 44 actually. So, you know, we really need to flip this around completely and start doing what you're suggesting here. Look at people's trauma. And I've had the same thing with doctors and GPs, and you know, I had to stop going to one GP because she'd almost say, "Oh, not you again," when I'd come into the room, you know.
Haven't you got over it yet?
Yeah, and I actually gave her like a 32-page story of my childhood and the things that happened in my childhood. So then she started writing to other health professionals saying I had a chaotic life. And like that really, really affronted me as well, because it's such a judgmental word, chaotic, you know. And probably my life is a bit chaotic, but it's because I'm trying so hard and striving so hard to work towards wellness. And I was really upset that she described me as chaotic. So I sort of eventually stopped going to her. But so many people, professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, are actually afraid to let you tell them about what happened to you when you were a little kid. It's like they're, "Oh no, we're not going to discuss that. Let's look at getting you well."
Yeah.
And they won't acknowledge it. Anyway,
that's right.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Well, I had a friend of mine who's a colleague say, "You're not becoming one of those mental health patients, are you?"
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cathy, I heard you last week at Westmead Hospital.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I'm not following you around.
Did I repeat myself?
It's great to hear you again. Can you hear me now? Okay. I want to thank you for raising this incredibly important issue about the traumatization of health professionals, because I think it is very, very misunderstood that people that render a service can be stressed and traumatized as well. I've been working in psychiatric hospitals for 30 years, and
You almost have to read it.
yeah, I was saying I worked in psychiatric hospitals for 30 years, and one of the things that has never been discussed is, what supervision do you have? Do you need some time out? Do you need some therapy? Do you need to go take time off from work? Those sorts of issues have never came up. So I just need, I feel I need to impress that on people that render services, that the workers themselves need to be protected against traumatization. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
100%.
Can I say something about that? Because I think it was the Herald the other day, and it was also came out on Mental Health Council Australia article. There was an article in there about sick leave and about how people take sickies to have a stress day and how they go to the beach and so on. And I actually wrote to my staff and said that that's a legitimate reason to take a sick day, and I actually encourage you to do it. And if going to the beach makes you healthy, go to the beach. So, so you'll never see anyone in New South Wales CAG ever again. But I just thought that was atrocious that that was actually written in the paper as, you know, that that's a sickie and those people are ripping off the system.
But again, it's a total lack of understanding.
Yeah, that's
It's the
right.
same basis.
Can I just make a comment? I can remember yonks ago, I was called in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, to come into the outpatient hospital section with docs and the police, and 8 o'clock or 8:30 the next morning was supposed to come into work and see 20 people that day. Now, what kind of service can you render? Because you yourself need some debriefing after 2 or 3 hours in the outpatient unit in the middle of the night. And I think those are the sorts of things that service delivery agents have to understood as well.
It's absolutely morning to you then. Keep going.
Can I very quickly say, for those of us who work in systems or have worked in systems, one of the things we found we needed to do was do some training in work in the system. And we found out what our rights are. And as a worker, you have rights and you're going to need to advocate for them just the same as us consumers that fought with our bloody guts to get to where we are. Sorry. I'm just tired of hearing about your workers.
Comment?
Yeah, just a very brief one. Regarding your joke about a psychiatrist, psychologist, and GP in the pub, just with your background experience as a GP and a consumer, what level would you place a consumer on the hierarchy grouping? Where would you place a consumer if the consumer was in that pub too, and there was 4 of them?
Consumers should be at the centre of it.
I think he should be at the top. Because, no, I'm serious. I think everything should be consumer run because they know what they want. And I'm so sick of psychiatrists, psychologists who I've spent so many hours with myself, and GPs, telling me what I think and what I know and what I
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, we're just putting it differently. Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. Yeah.
I was just going to say, having been a consumer in the mental health ward, say some 30 years ago, and now working in mental health wards down in Wollongong, the thing that strikes me is the architecture of the system, the fact that we're still building institutions that are going to cause trauma for the people who are being cared for. And the type of trauma that you spoke about over there, if you're working in a system that is morally corrupt or bankrupt, working in a system where you are seeing trauma and are powerless to stop it, as many good nurses start their career coming into psychiatric care, well, what happens is you become traumatised and leave, perhaps, or become like the people who initially traumatised you in the workplace. So it's, if we're going to look at trauma-informed care, we've got to look at the basic architecture of our wards and the fact that all the money goes into building more of the same thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I'm just so proud of you. You're just so transparent, with what you're discussing. And just like, well, there's actually a normal person here. And yeah, what I'd like to just address about, supervision and debriefing. Like, I've been in the health industry for a long time, and after I got traumatized, well, we just get over it, but the truth is, we really needed that help, and if we can kind of like have a petition maybe to the government, like, because as a group, I think we have a power to, rise up and, have like, hey, we're helping people here. We need some help as well. Thank you.
I've got the microphone, so I'm just going to say something as well. That get over it thing is really important because it's almost like when people cry and people want to stop them from crying. When people start thinking about talking about trauma or coping mechanisms for trauma. I have 2 foster children, they're my grandchildren, and they were removed from their parents when they were 6 and 4, just 6 and 4. And they've experienced significant trauma, and they have a lot of coping mechanisms, both very different coping mechanisms. And families and even doctors and other professionals say they're all right now because they're with you, which isn't true. And they even have like family members say things like, oh, my kid does that too. You're reading too much into it. Like, so there's a whole stigma. And then another example, which was really shocking just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I had some really shocking news. Sorry, I'm going to cry to talk about it. My cousin, who's 55, committed suicide in a very horrific way. And I didn't know this, and I sort of knew there was some secret in his life. We're driving home from the funeral, and my mum, like everyone's like, oh, I don't know what happened. Is he happy? He's a businessman. He's got lots of money. Maybe he lost his money, whatever. We're driving home. My mum says he's always had a bit of a chip on his shoulder about that abuse he got through the Catholic Church. And it was like, oh well, that was a real throwaway comment, and I nearly crashed the car. I just couldn't believe it. But anyway, sorry, now I'm getting all upset because I shouldn't talk about that at this point because it's still really ruining our family. Cathy, I have a question for you, and that is that my daughter also, well, she's suffers from mental illness and drug abuse, and also manages to collect very abusive partners, and so the children have experienced like domestic violence and abuse as well. We don't know what her trauma is, and we've been told that she most definitely had some sort of significant trauma when she was a child. We don't know what that is. We don't know whether it's just an ongoing traumatic experience or... so I guess it comes back to that question. What happens if you don't know what the trauma is?
Who does she trust? Who would she talk to?
She trusts me.
You know, if it's about maybe a professional just developing a relationship of trust and seeing.
So that's really difficult because she's actually...
Not saying that's easy.
She's actually very, very paranoid and worried about any sort of professional. So that's we're sort of grappling with that, and we have been for a very long time. So now, after all that, sorry, I'd like to thank Cathy very much, and I'd like to call Carson. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your significant knowledge with us.
Good.
Cathy's got something to present to you.
Oh, sorry. It's very, very hidden. This is just a little gift to say thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Good. Thanks.